British North American colonies. And that's what Patrick Henry called them. Patrick Henry was called, Babin, at that time, the greatest patriot, right?
Yes.
The guy who said, give me liberty or give me death.
Right.
But if you read 10 years prior to this, when he wrote the Virginia Resolves, you can actually type in those two words, Virginia Resolves. You can see even in Henry's mind, they were barely coming out of what I call the divine right of kings. Because he was talking about, the loyalty of His Majesty's liege people and the British colonies and the charters that they had, had inestimable value and gained from having these charters from the king and so forth. So in 10 years, he kind of changed his mind. I mean, they had some problems then. That was the beginning of the problems because they didn't like the Stamp Act. The Virginia Resolves were written for that. And then 10 years later, they suffered under that Stamp Act, and they decided, okay, we got to do something more than this. Just complaining is not working.
Is there a way to use FRNs or partake maybe in the money that we put in Social Security without being bound up under the thumb of these folks?
There's only one way. This is why I mentioned my website. It's come to my website. It's gonna take time to learn this. Obviously, it took me 10 years.
Right.
The good thing about what I do is I can compress people's time frames. It might take a year. It might take 18 months. And the people that are around me now, the members of my website, people who have been around me for the last 4, 5, or 6 years, sometimes it'll take them a year, and they'll come back and they'll say, I can't believe how much different I think now than I did back then. This has changed my entire way of thinking. And it's the same way it did for me. Like I say, I have not, except for reading that Article 2, Section 3 a minute ago, it's the first thing I pulled up just so I could read it word for word out of the Constitution, because this really is ingrained in me. I understand what it's going to take, and what it's going to take to do what you're talking about with the FRNs and the Social Security is you have to do what they did. So they exercise their right of self-determination to come out from under the king and then form their own nation state, form their own country.
David Williams,
called the United States of America.
David Williams, it's tough to get 5 people together to decide what the hell restaurant to go to. How would you possibly get a group of people together to form something here to do what you're saying? You got to be very careful, wouldn't you, with what people you would get together and form your little nation state or country or whatever you're going to call it?
Yeah, you have to be careful. I mean, and we are. There's a lot of people around me. When we did the documentation and things that I did earlier, I mentioned United States of our world, and we had filed a treaty with the Universal Postal Union. Now, I split from those men because, like you said, you can't get 5 people to agree on anything. But 21 of us came together to file that document as a declaration and as a tort claim, and actually filed it with the Supreme Court. So we had 21 of us that came out at that time, and we were doing it properly, except for one thing. Once you do this, under the rights and duties of nations, it says in here that a nation has a right to exist even before recognition. So if you do this, you have the right to exist as long as you don't interfere with an innocent or unoffending state. Yeah. And I've told you that the United States was watching us very closely, and they never crossed the line. They never offended us. One of our guys went back in and created a lawsuit against them after I told everyone, we all agreed, once we do this, this is the peaceful settlement. Leave them alone. Yeah. From here on out, leave them alone. Yeah. And he went back in and made the fatal mistake of doing just that. He sued one of their court judges or officers or something again, which offended the U.S., and they arrested him. And they actually subpoenaed me to come testify against him, and I did because of his violation. And the reason I had to, because of the violation, was in international law, it says the federated state is viewed as a sole person. And when he did it, I was so furious I couldn't stand it. I said, understand that I'm now in collusion with your lunacy and what you just did? Wow.
Well, how did they arrest him? Excuse me for interrupting, David. How did they arrest him if he had diplomatic immunity?
In the international law, I'll tell you exactly how. Paddleford case. The Paddleford case states that silent acquiescence in breach of a treaty binds an entire nation. they got him to acquiesce to their demands for 18 months, and he would not respond to them. He was arrogant. He would not respond to them at all. Same thing they did with Saddam Hussein. People wonder why. How did they get into Iraq? Well, Saddam Hussein violated international treaties, and those international treaties, when he acquiesced to the demands and did not come back into peace, into a peaceful settlement, a peaceful state, in clearing up those violations of treaty, that's when the UN decided to take enforcement. Of course, the U.S. does that because they are on the Security Council. So silent acquiescence in breach of a treaty. For 18 months, the U.S. tried to get him to get back into and quit doing what he did. And for 18 months, I tried to get him to quit doing what he did too. And I told him, I said, they are going to run acquiescence on you just like we've been doing on them, because that's what we were doing. That's how we got our agreements. And the U.S. was honoring it. When he dishonored it, I knew he had bound all of us. And if I didn't testify against him, they would have considered me to be in collusion with what he did in the violation.
What?
And so I knew I had to. And he called me after he got out of prison, Patrick, and he said, I just want you to know I didn't have anything against you for testifying against me. And I said, well, why would you? You breached your agreement with me. I don't care what you did to the United States. You said that you would leave them alone from now on, and you didn't. So you got what you deserved.
How long was he in prison?
Oh, just for 6 months. They just gave him a tap on the shoulder to teach him a lesson.
When you say the United States knew what you guys were doing, how do you know that? Well, obviously they did with this fellow, but before that, how did you know that they knew what you were doing with your treaty and all that?
Just because I knew, because of the way they would treat us. I'm sorry, somebody's trying to nail me on Skype here.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, just told them I'm on the phone. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Interesting things used to happen around us. I mean, weird things. You know, one time we filed a case in Charleston, South Carolina. We got to the door. We filed it with the post office, with the customs house. We didn't file it with the clerk. And I told Russell, I said, I think you did this wrong. I said, he said, no, the customs house has to make sure that we can get into the courtroom, because he had filed a postmaster treaty, and they would call him and us postmasters. He would call him specifically Mr. Postmaster, but he didn't file the clerk that day. We'd get to court, and they wouldn't let us in the door. The marshals were there. And literally the marshal, I was standing behind, at the time, the guy was working with my friend. I'll mention his first name was Russell. And the marshal literally said, gentlemen, you can't come in here today. This is a private corporation, and you don't have an appointment.
Private corporation, and you don't have an appointment. Wow.
Yes. And but then we went outside and held our own court and held the flag up and whatever. We were doing some things right. We were also doing some things wrong, but they were watching. And when he would specifically go to court, they would call him Mr. Postmaster because of filing these treaties the way he did. The marshals would.
Isn't it dangerous, though, if you're going to do something like this and you get involved and, like you experienced, that you're responsible for what somebody else in this treaty or this organization does? That's pretty spooky. How do you know what people are going to do? I don't want to have somebody do something weird and then I'm on the hook as well. I can only vouch for myself that I'm going to be a good guy.
I have certain people around me that we can do certain background checks. I don't want people around me that, when I'm very serious, Patrick, about this. Let's look at what they said in that Declaration of Independence. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It takes a lot of honor to do this.
Yeah, I would think.
Honor is something that has lost on people today. They don't know how to honor an agreement.
Right, yeah.
And the whole entire culture here, people wonder why it's collapsing. If you just look at that one principle alone, that people don't know how to honor their agreements, that alone will crush an entire society.
That's what's going on right now, right?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
So to come out of this system and exercise the right of self-determination, they told you how bad it was going to be. They did 3 movies worth of people getting killed in the Matrix until they got to the peace agreement.